Uh, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth day of the week-long 4th Bangladesh Economics Summit 2022, organized by the Economic Studies Center ESC of the University of Dhaka. I am Lubaba Mehzabeen and
I am Salman Saqib Rahman.
And we are your hosts for today's event.
The Bangladesh Economics Summit is the flagship event of the ESC. It intends to foster academic policy discussions and research interest in students. With that view in mind, today we will have presentations on the research papers published in the Bangladesh Students Digest on Economics and Development Volume 4. ESC first envisioned this journal 4 years ago, which for the first time in Bangladesh would focus extensively on research papers by undergraduate and postgraduate students. This year, the journal consisted of different articles by students studying in the best institutions in South Asian countries, including Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka.
Now, without any further ado, it is time to introduce our honorable special guest, Dr. Rizwanul Islam, who will be sharing his thoughts on the presentations at the end. Dr. Islam is an economist and former special advisor in the employment sector at the International Labour Organization in Geneva. Dr. Islam completed his bachelor's and master's in economics from the University of Dhaka, and in 1976 received his PhD in economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science, LSE, under the supervision of Professor and Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. An expert in development economics, Dr. Rizwanul Islam held a variety of positions throughout his long and distinguished career, including being an associate professor at the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. He joined the International Labour Organization ILO in 1980 and held directorial positions of various ILO departments, including employment strategy and economic and labor market analysis.
Next, we would like to introduce our Honorable Session Chair, Dr. Sayema Haque Bidisha Madam, who is a professor in the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. Currently, she is also working as the Research Director at the South Asian Network on Economic Modeling, SANEM, specializing in the field of labor economics, population economics, development economics, and microeconometrics. She has also worked with several international and national organizations, including the World Bank, the IDRC, ILO, FAO, Asia Foundation, and the INM.
Now, we would like to introduce our presenters in the order they will be presenting. First, we have Mr. Kaustav Sen from the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata, India. Next, we have Mr. Pasan Wijayawardhana from the Department of Business Economics, Faculty of Management Studies and Commerce, University of Jayewardenepura, Sri Lanka, followed by Mr. Zaeem-Al Ehsan from the Institute of Business Administration, University of Dhaka, and Mr. Ragib Anjum from the Department of World Religions and Culture, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. Finally, we have Mr. Kishan Poudel from the Central Department of Economics at Tribhuvan University, Nepal.
We now request Professor Sayema Haque Bidisha to take the floor and conduct the remainder of the session.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think I'm audible. First of all, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, because people are connecting from different parts of the world today. So it's a great pleasure and honor for me as well to welcome everyone, and especially to welcome Dr. Rizwanul Islam, whom we know that he has a very colorful and very vibrant career, and he has from teaching to research, and I'm sure that today he will be able to provide some interesting input to the students' paper. And it is also very exciting that today we have paper from different parts of South Asia, and I'm sure by the end of the session we will be able to know about different development aspects of South Asian economy. So I myself is really excited to chair this session. So without further delay, let me go to the presenters. And for the presenters, each of the presenters will have around 7 minutes to present their paper. And after that, we can make some comments. And at the end of the session, at the end of all of the presentations, Dr. Rizwanul Islam will provide some observation on the papers and on the overall development aspects of the economy. So now let me first go to the first presenter, who is Kaustav Sen from India, and he's from Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. And if I'm not wrong, he will be talking about rural-urban migration in the context of India. So, Kaustav, over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, a very good afternoon to all the esteemed judges, fellow participants present over here. Myself, Kaustav from Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. The topic of my paper is Rural-Urban Migration, FDI and Trade Interlinkage and Development Policies, a General Equilibrium Analysis. Rural-urban migration and rapid urbanization has been a common feature of growth and development in less developed economies. Rural areas of countries like India suffer from um, scarcity of better paying jobs due to lack of investment. The paper examines the impact of trade FDI on rural-urban migration and tries to provide some solutions for the balanced growth in the rural and urban sectors of a less developed economy. So here is a literature review, which I am skipping for due to the paucity of time. So we start, let me so we start with a microeconomic model which tries to explain the decision-making process of migration by an individual by maximizing its utility. So utility here is a function of labor supply, income, and alpha, which is the migration coefficient. Here alpha denotes whether the person thinks of migrating to another place. So alpha equal to 1 denotes he permanently leaves the place, and alpha equal to 0 denotes he stays at the place. Now, these solutions can be thought of boundary solutions. Interior solutions like alpha strictly between 0 and 1 may also occur. YE is the expected, YE and YI are the expected income of an individual if he chooses to migrate or if he stays back in his native place. And thus, aggregating that, we can get the aggregate expected income, which is Y, which is a function of L and alpha, and putting them in the utility function, we can maximize the utility in terms of alpha and L. And then we get the first order conditions from which we can derive the migration coefficient alpha star and L star, which is the labor supply function. Also, we find a upper bound to the risk awareness of the individual which is 1 by EYL, which is the elasticity of income with respect to labor. With this upper bound is like if beyond, if he is more risk averse, then he won't migrate, even if there is a change in the wage rate. Now we move on to the general equilibrium model of our paper, which is an extension of the Jones and Fields paper. So we have in our model 3 sectors: one rural sector R producing agricultural commodities which is exported, and 2 urban sector, urban informal sector I and urban formal sector M. M is the import competing sector and I produces a non-traded good. So both the sectors M and I use labor and capital, while land is specific to sector R. Since we assume a small open economy, we assume constant product prices for the 2 international traded goods, whereas the price of the non-traded good is determined in the domestic market using demand and supply forces.
Mr. Kaustav, are you facing any difficulties?
Okay, I think I was thinking that it's my problem, but it seems like he has some connectivity issue. So let's wait for probably a couple of minutes to see if it connects. Sometimes if you just keep your video off, you get better connectivity. Can anyone contact Kaustav?
Yes, I'm trying to contact him.
Should we move on to the next presenter until Mr. Kaustav comes back?
It seems like now probably that would be a better idea. We can come to him later. So if we join, so for the next presenter, I think we have with us Mr. Pasan Wijayawardhana from Sri Lanka, and he is from University of Sri Jayewardenepura. Sorry if I misspell the name. And he will be talking about, it's a very interesting topic. It's about inequality in education in the context of Sri Lanka. So Pasan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, madam. I'll keep my camera off because of the ongoing power cut in Sri Lanka. Sometimes you might heard about the power cuts in Sri Lanka. Madam, I have shared a recorded video earlier. Is it okay to play the recorded video, or am I go with the presentation live? But I have to come with my mobile phone. I don't know whether will be
okay. If you are obviously live is better, but if you're facing trouble, I think it's I think from the organization of ECA they can confirm that. I think it's okay if he plays a video recorded message. What do you think?
Sorry, just got disconnected.
Kaustav, because you are disconnected, so we started with the next presentation. Maybe what we can do after Mr. Pasan is finished, then we will get back to you. Okay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Sure. Ma'am, I'll play Pasan's video.
Okay, sure. And Pasan, you can just
thank you very much, madam.
Add whichever you want to add. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Why segregation matters. An analysis on regional inequality in educational input and outcome of Sri Lanka. Introduction. We know in Sri Lanka, there is a certain kind of inequality in educational distribution. Unequal access to quality education is a reason for 4.7-year learning gap of Sri Lanka with compared to global students, according to SIPA. So you can see in the screen, it shows a provincial contribution for education in country's GDP across provinces. Western province is leading, northern, eastern, north central, over these provinces are suffering with low level of education. However, absence of education can cause intergenerational transmission of poverty. Therefore, educational inequality is a poverty generator. We address this problem in this research. Objectives, primary objectives. Macro level, to examine the relationship between the education and poverty in South Asia. Micro level, to investigate the educational input and outcome determinants of school educational inequality across provinces in Sri Lanka. Secondary objective, to examine the linkage between the educational inputs and outcomes in provinces of Sri Lanka. Methodology. In methodology, we have already ran two types of analysis. One, macro level analysis, other one is micro level analysis. Macro level analysis involves in identifying the relationship between education and poverty in entire South Asian region. But micro level analysis is a kind of in-depth analysis which involves in investigating educational inequality in terms of educational inputs and outcomes in Sri Lanka with regard to year 2016. Okay, the methodology of macro analysis use the panel data model, and our dependent variable is GNI per capita, which is a proxy for poverty. And education level, nutrition level, agricultural productivity was used as the independent variables. In micro level analysis, we have constructed indices to compare the educational inequality across 9 provinces in Sri Lanka. To construct indices, we have used the distance to frontile score approach, which was the method used in Legatum Prosperity Index as well. So there are two outputs in microanalysis: educational input facilitation index EIFI and educational outcome index EOI. And in EIFI, we have considered four educational input pillars: the schools, teachers, ID facility and knowledge, educational focus. And in EOI, we use two educational outcome pillars, namely school attainment and academic performances of O level and A level, analytics and results. According to macro level analytics and results, educational level, our key variable, showed positive relationship, 10% significant positive relationship with income. That means by increasing the education level, we can reduce the poverty. So we proved our hypothesis very well in macro level analysis. And micro level analysis involving calculation of EIFI and EOI. Finally, we have combined these two index values together and finally created new index called CEI, Combined Educational Index. Based on this combined educational index, we have classified 9 provinces into 3 provincial segments, namely green flag, yellow flag, and red flag. However, I have used Power BI analytical tool in order to showcase the results of our findings in micro level analysis. Let's see. This is the Power BI tool that I use, or the Power BI tool dashboard that I use to showcase the results of micro analysis. Let's see the Western Province. Western Province is a green flag area. You can see the educational input facilitation index is somewhere around 81%. That means Sri Lanka's Western Province is only 19% behind the educational input best facilitation level in entire Sri Lanka. Educational outcome index, it is somewhere around 98%. That means it is 2% behind the frontier, which represent the best educational outcome level across all the 9 provinces. By combining this EIFI and EOI, we can construct this combined educational index. It is 91%. That means Western Province is only 9% behind the frontier, which represent the best level, education level in terms of inputs and outcomes. But look at the Ua province, it is a red flag area. Guys, you can see the combined educational index is 24%. That means Ua province is not only, it is 76% behind the frontier, which represent the best education level across all 9 provinces. So Western province is only 9% behind the frontier, best performance level. Ua province is 76% behind the best performance level for the frontier. That means there is a huge disparity in terms of educational inputs and outcomes across the 9 provinces in Sri Lanka. Let's move to the findings. The first chart represents or shows the relationship between the schools and the educational outcome. This says that presence of one AB school can determine educational outcome strongly than the school density. The provinces with large percentage of 1 AB schools have performed well in terms of education than the other provinces, right? I have to share the screen once again, right? Okay, so 1 AB schools is an important determinant of educational outcome than the school density. And the second chart shows the relationship between the teachers and outcome of the education. This says that all the teacher category, graduates, trainees, trained, all the teacher categories can equally contribute for the educational outcome. But graduate teachers can be identified as an important determinant of A-level performances. Third chart regarding IT facilities and knowledge. The highest IT facilities and knowledge were recorded from the Western Province and lowest was recorded from the Eastern Province. One reason for that is Eastern Province is the province with lowest percentage of English medium students. So English language scale is a crucial factor affecting for the computer literacy according to UNESCO. Therefore, need to have more English medium students in Eastern Province. However, the fourth chart shows the relationship between the educational outcome and educational expense, but it says that there is no any significant relationship between those two variables. O-level and A-level performances were highest in Western Province. However, the Eastern province who performed well in O level shows lowest performance in A level. So one of the reasons for that is Eastern people have migrated to other provinces for A level classes. That means the internal migration. And the Northwestern province, who showed the third worst performance in O level, has showed second best performance in A level. So one of the reasons for that is the developed educational system or the tuition system in Northwestern province. So this is only second for the Western province in terms of number of tuition centers. Right. And finally, according to discussion and conclusion, these are my recommendations. Number one, government should give more focus on turning schools into one AP schools, especially in provinces such as Central, North Central, Eastern, Northwestern provinces, than increasing number of schools unnecessarily. Number two, expansion of a STEM education system is essential for low-performing provinces like Ur, Northern, Eastern, and North Central provinces. Number three, English fluency should be developed in most of rural provinces. Therefore, English medium classes should be expanded in provinces like Ur, Eastern provinces in order to reduce the disparity of computer literacy. And government should take some steps to reduce the internal migration from O level to A level classes in provinces in order to protect the performances of education in all provinces. And also, the establishment of the tuition sector is extremely critical. The government should do certain kind of a survey regarding the contribution of tuition for educational system. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, that was all. Thank you.
I think, hello. Yeah. Kaustav, have you, sorry, Kaustav, Pasan, have you finished?
Yeah, madam.
Yeah. Okay. I will just provide some very quick comments. So I think it's very exciting, and I really like the way that you try to link and to bring both the macro context and the micro context, and that is, I think, that has added to the paper. So one thing I would like to add is like when we are talking about any index, we should keep in mind that whether we are putting the same weight to all of the indices, because there are a lot of components of an index. So whether we are putting the same weight or we are putting different weights. So as part of improvement of the paper, you can think about whether you will put the similar weight to all of the components. That is one thing. And the thing is, like some of the components, to my knowledge or to my understanding, it just seemed like can be highly correlated, because some of the things, obviously, because you are talking about education, so about the school, about the student performance, these can be very highly correlated. So so in that case, you may also think that whether you want to reduce the number of subcomponents that you are talking about. So that is also you can think about. Often people does principal component analysis to find out which will be the source of importance. Then another thing is, like I was thinking that whether you have followed any literature. So if you have followed any literature, that could be interesting. So from that literature, maybe you can shorten or trim down the index. That could reduce the problem of the multicollinearity and this sort of overlapping relationship or simultaneity type of relationship. And it would be interesting to have sort of more econometric analysis with this index, because given that you have constructed an interesting index and given that you have found a lot of regional disparity, so having more sophisticated econometric analysis, that could be that can be a way forward, and I think that can really add value to the literature. And for the macro part, I was just thinking the type of variables that you have added, like the explanatory variable. So generally, like in a common sense point of view, we generally say that when we are talking about income or GDP, we say that it's a function of capital, labor, and some other factors. So I was just thinking whether you should, in order to make the story more complex, you should, as a control variable at least, to bring some factors which are like that can be private investment to GDP ratio or something like that, which captures the capital stock in the economy as a control variable. And on top of education, maybe you can also think about the labor force participation rate or some other components of labor force as another additional variable. So these things, I think, would make the story more complete and more interesting. And I think what I personally liked about the way you tried to explain the regional differences, and that is, I think, the strength of your analysis. And I would say if you can, obviously there can be some issues related to endogeneity if you want to deal with this type of analysis, but still I think like if you can work on these differences, these regional differences, and to bring out a better story, that will be very interesting for the policy implication and for better publication as well. So that's from my side. I think Dr. Rizwan will go for comments in the later stage. That is yeah, okay. So thank you. So now let's go to the next presenter. So as the next presenter, we have Zaeem-Al Ehsan, who is from Institute of Business Administration, Bangladesh. And Zaeem will be talking about permanent income hypothesis for Bangladesh and Vietnam. So Zaeem, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, miss. Thank you for the introduction. I'll share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I am Zaeem-Al Ehsan. I'm currently a graduate student in economics at East West University. I first want to thank the Economic Studies Center of Dhaka University for arranging such an awesome seminar. It's giving budding economists such as myself to interact with economists such as Bidisha Madam and Rizwanul sir. It's particularly intimidating to speak in front of Rizwanul sir because I was reading a paper of his on jobless growth in Bangladesh just a couple of months ago. So I'll try my best not to embarrass myself in front of him. So the topic of my presentation is to see whether the permanent income hypothesis holds for Bangladesh. I wanted to test it out whether it holds for Bangladesh. It started off from one of my assignments. So while the analysis is super simple, it does give a good insight into understanding the consumption behavior in Bangladesh. So this will be the overall structure of my presentation. So the central tenet of this paper is the permanent income hypothesis, which is the brainchild of Milton Friedman. The hypothesis states that consumers' income is primarily composed of their temporary income and their permanent one, and consumption is mainly driven by the more permanent income. And temporary income is being defined as the short-term fluctuations that are brought about by changes in the business cycle. According to Milton Friedman, the consumption is solely a function of your permanent income. Like any economic theory, the permanent income hypothesis has been under the scrutiny of researchers since its inception. It has been tested for its applicability in rural India, in South American countries, and other East Asian countries, where they do see that there is some sort of income decomposition, which means that they do see that households are basing some of their consumption on their permanent income. However, they do reject the strict form of the permanent income hypothesis, since they do see that households are basing some of their consumption on their transitory or more temporary income. This can be explained by the high volatility of current income in developing countries. Other researchers also estimate the marginal propensity to consume in different countries, and we can see that the marginal propensity hovers around 0.5 around the world. I could not come across a paper that solely focused on Bangladesh, so I attempted to write this paper to sort of fill that gap. So before I start getting into the model, we have to start off with a sort of a theoretical framework for the hypothesis. The first assumption is, like I said, the income is primarily composed of a permanent component and a transitory component. The second assumption is that consumers generally consume the same amount over their lifespan, which ultimately means that they have the same utility function over their entire life. So which gives us the utility function as equation 3. Households aim to maximize their utility they gain from consumption, subject to their intertemporal budget constraint, and hence they maximize equation 4. So I use annual data pertaining to the time periods 1970 to 2020. I use the variables final consumption expenditure per capita and the real GDP per capita, which I have sourced from the World Bank's open data repository. I divided the time period into 3 sub-periods. So 1970 to 1990, 1990 to 2020, and the entire sample of 1970 to 2020. The main reason for doing so was to see whether the high growth that Bangladesh faced in the 1990s had any differential impact on consumption pattern. And as we can see in the 1990s, we do see a higher consumption per capita and a higher GDP per capita. So I thought it would be interesting just to see whether there is any differential impact on it. So the main essence of this paper was to extract the transitory and the permanent income from the absolute value of income. A time series variable can be said to be comprised of a seasonal, a cyclical, a trend, and a random error component. So for my analysis, I wanted to extract the transitory, which is the cyclical part, and the permanent, which is the trend part from the GDP. So to this end, I used 2 methods, the Hodrick-Prescott filter and the linear trend method, to extract the cyclical and the trend parts of income. So the first one, the Hodrick-Prescott filter, is a time series. It's a time smoothing.
You have
technique.
3 minutes left.
Okay. So the Hodrick-Prescott filter is a time smoothing technique which allows you to extract the short-term fluctuations that are associated with the business cycle. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the model due to the time constraint and my lack of knowledge on it, but it does allow me to extract the cyclical component from a time series variable. So once I get the cyclical component of GDP, I simply subtract it from the actual GDP to get the permanent GDP, which will act as my permanent income. So from here, I have my cyclical income and my permanent income from this method. Moving on to the linear trend method, I simply regress time on GDP, and then I predict GDP based on the time. So what this does is this gives me the GDP permanent income that is brought about by time, and I simply subtract this from the actual GDP, which gives me the cyclical component of income. So these 2 methods generally differs in the way they give me the parameters, but they more or less are the same. And these are just the time plots of it. This is the regression model that I will be estimating. So A0 is the autonomous consumption, which shows the amount of consumption a country or individual will consume when their income is 0. A1 is the marginal propensity to consume based on your permanent income, and A2 is the marginal propensity to consume based on your transitory income. So under the permanent income hypothesis, I would expect A1 to be 1 and A0 and A2 to be 0. So what this means is consumption is primarily and only brought about by your permanent income, and the transitory income has no significant impact on your consumption. Like any time series variable, I had to run the stationary tests of it, and they are different. They are stationary in their first different form. However, I run my analysis on the level form of the data, which remains
You have 1 minute left.
So I'll just summarize my results here. We do see that all parameters are statistically significant from 0. So here I show the estimates from the linear trend method. So we're focusing on the table. We're focusing on the left-hand side of the table. we see that across all time periods that are used, the permanent income does have a statistically significant impact on consumption. So does your transitory income. And what surprised me was that in the periods 1970 to 1990, the transitory income actually had a higher marginal propensity than your permanent income, which is a stark violation of the permanent income hypothesis. Similarly, here we focus on the estimates based on the Hodgkin-Prescott filter. Here we also reject the null hypothesis that estimates are zero. Even more so, we also find that the transitory component of income has a higher impact on your consumption than your permanent income. So the main agenda of this paper was to test whether Bangladeshis actually engage in consumption smoothing, which we do see exists to some extent. However, the transitory income also has a higher impact than your permanent income, which is not what the hypothesis originally states. I'll end my presentation. These are the references. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think it's really appreciable that you try to work on this issue. I have some small observation. One is I would be interested to know that have you compared your result with other results for other countries during the similar time period? And I think some of the studies have been done in the context of Bangladesh, whether you have compared and whether you have found a similar result. That is one point I would be interested to know. Secondly is like often in the context of countries like Bangladesh, because we know that the data over time, when we take GDP data or when we take the data for the time series component, because of the rebasing and because of the definitional change, often the numbers can be misleading. So I just want you to make sure that you have taken care of these issues. So that is second point. And thirdly, though you try to look at the permanent income hypothesis, but I was just thinking that it would be interesting. You can also add more value to the paper if you look at if you just try co-integration analysis with consumption and different parts of income and see like how co-integrated they are, and that would add some additional value to the paper as well. Otherwise, from technical point of view, I think you did the stationary test and then you did the filtering, the HP filter that is commonly used, and the way you have conducted analysis, it has very interesting story. So you may try to add some more value to the paper by adding more components to it and to comparing with different countries of the world and to comparing with the previous literature. So that is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, maybe we should go back to the first presenter because Kaustav has returned. So Kaustav, do you want to start presenting your paper now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Should I start from the beginning?
Yeah. I think it's okay. You can skip the introduction because it's just 10 minutes back we have
Okay.
got.
Yeah, sure. Should I start from the model?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay, thank you. So we start with a microeconomic model which tries to explain the migration decision-making process of an individual by maximizing the utility of that individual. And utility is a function of labor supply, income, and the variable alpha, which is a migration coefficient. Here alpha denotes alpha denotes whether the person thinks of migrating to another place. So alpha equal to 1 denotes he permanently leaves the place, and alpha equal to 0 denotes he stays at the place. These solutions can be thought of as a boundary solutions. Interior solutions like alpha strictly between 0 and 1 may also occur. YE is and YI are the expected income of the individual if he chooses to migrate or if he stays back in the native place. This putting Y in the utility function, we can get utility as a function of ln alpha, and then maximizing it with respect to ln alpha, we get the first order conditions from which we can derive the alpha star and L star, which are the migration coefficient function and the labor supply function. Also, we derive a sufficient condition which from which we can have a upper bound to the risk awareness of the person migrating beyond, which is 1 by E to the E by L, which is the elasticity of income with respect to labor, and beyond that, he or she won't migrate. So coming to the general equilibrium model, we have three sectors here. One is a rural sector R, producing agricultural commodities, which is exported, and two urban sector, urban informal I and urban formal sector M. M is the import competing sector, whereas I is produces a non-traded good. Both sectors M and I use labor and capital, while land is specific to the sector R. Since we assume a small open economy, we have constant product prices for the two internationally traded goods, whereas the price of the non-traded good is determined in the domestic market using demand and supply forces. The wage of labor in the informal and formal sector are assumed to be perfectly flexible, and wage of the formal sector labor is fixed. So now we state the rural-urban migration equilibrium for the entire economy, where JM is basically the total number of job seekers in the urban formal sector, which comprises of LM, which is basically the already existing labor force in the formal sector. A fraction of the informal sector worker also searches for job in the formal sector, which is H. And among the total migrating population, alpha R, LR from the rural sector, N fraction searches for job in the urban sector. So we can derive the probability of finding a job is basically equal to the total employment in the urban formal sector divided by JM. And now we can find the expected wage in all the three sectors. Like in urban rural sector, either the person.
You have 3 minutes left.
Yeah. Either the person finds a job in the formal sector, or he shifts back to the rural sector. Thus, we get ER, and by equating all the three expected wages, we can find the rural-urban migration equilibrium. Now, here is the general equilibrium structure of the economy. The first three equations gives the usual price and unit cost equality conditions. The next three conditions gives the full employment conditions. The equation 11 and 12 gives the equations that we derive from the rural-urban migration equilibrium. Then we have from the labor supply full employment condition, and including equation 13 and 14. Equation 13 and 14 basically states the the right hand side is the left hand side is basically the supply of labor in the rural market, and the right hand side is the demand. And similarly, we have for the informal sector. While combining these three equations, we can get equation number 15. And equation number 16, which is the next line, is basically the demand and supply equality in the informal sector. Also, we assume that urban formal sector is relatively more capital intensive than the urban informal sector in both physical and value sense. So we perform some comparative statics. First, we consider changes in foreign investments in land. Investments in the agricultural sector in the rural India can transform barren lands into productive lands through increase in proper water storage facilities and likewise methods. So if we consider the total land endowment as TD plus TF and consider an increase in TF through foreign investments, this will lower the rate of return to land. And this in turn should imply an increase in PI and WR from our model, which we can derive mathematically. And with an increase in land as well, we have the increase in output of rural sector R, since that is a specific factor. This will in turn have an increase in employment of labor in the rural sector.
You have 1 minute left.
With an increase in employment and wages in the rural sector, there will be a less attraction for migration as well. And since R uses output of sector I as intermediate input, in our model. So output of sector I also will increase. Both the urban sectors form a hexagonal subsystem, and that will lead to thus sector I will basically expand by absorbing more labor, and M will contract at one point. Thus we have ultimately, as wage rates in the rural sector will increase, we have migration will fall in the overall economy, as well as employment in the economy will increase. While if we consider capital inflows in the um, formal sector, that will lead to an increase in employment in our model, but it will lead to a increase in migration as well, thus putting a lot of pressure on the cities of formal sector. Similarly, I have done a trade so consider a case of trade liberalization where with an increase in the agricultural price, by liberating trade, by removing the trade barriers, the PR will go increase. That will lead to an increase in WR, and ultimately migration will fall. Also, I've conducted a small empirical study where to validate the points that we get from the model. Our dependent variable is the rural urban migration, and if we I have considered foreign capital in FDI basically, and other three variables. So with an increase in FDI leads to an higher migration in Indian economy, because a very negligible part of for FDI actually goes to the agricultural sector. While we see that if there is an increase in net sown area or a increase in credit for agriculture, this will lead to a fall in migration. Thus, I can conclude. Yes, should I just? I'm just concluding.
Yeah, please try to wrap up in like a minute.
Yeah. So basically, what we try to do in the paper is a theoretical foundation for the need of FDI in both the rural and urban sector. If we put a if we increase the flow of capital in the agricultural sector, this will lead to a increase in the rural development and well-being of people, and as well as this will lead to lesser pressure in the specific cities that actually have the formal sector part. And so also this will lead to an increase in agricultural output, which will create more productive job opportunities. So thank you. Should I stop sharing?
Thank you, Kaustav. I think yeah. I think it's really great to see that you are having both theoretical and empirical aspect together. So I think due to the time constraint, we were not able to listen to your empirical aspects a lot. But some general observation, I think it's a very good work, given that you have introduced the issue of the general equilibrium here. So I'm just wondering, like, whether you have thought or whether you have discussed somewhere about the prospect of international migration, because in the context of India, that is very important as well. So it's just like, if you have already talked about it, then it's okay, but that is one important aspect. Then when we are talking about, when I was just as a naive reader, if I look at the urban sector, then the categorization like formal and informal. So I was thinking that whether you have thought about having more segregation here. I know that in general equilibrium analysis, we generally don't have a lot of categorization, but still, if you could have something related to, like, because in rural case, farm behavior and the non-farm economic behavior, that can be quite drastically different. I was thinking about in the context of Bangladesh, and in India, there is a big service sector as well, and the service does not only mean that big service sector, formal service sector, but informal service sector as well. So formal, informal service can have quite different characteristics as well. But obviously in the general equilibrium analysis, you cannot have lot of categories and lot of variables together. So that is one issue. And another thing I was thinking that maybe you can make things a bit more interesting to think about it like a push factor and the pull factor, because when we are talking about migration, then the traditional issue that comes is whether it's a push factor and the pull factor. And from that point of view, I was just looking at your empirical model, and because I am a more of an empirical person, so I would be more interested to look at that. And in the empirical model, I was thinking that I think you were more talking about issues which is the push factor related to the agriculture sector. So why not having some pull factor which is related to the urban sector? So job opportunities in the urban area, or some issues related to the I don't know whether it is possible for you to capture, but educational facilities in the urban area, network facilities in the urban area. So those pull factor, push factor, those pull factor can be quite interesting if you can capture that, and that could make the story more appealing. That is what I was thinking. But I think having the issue of the empirical analysis, that itself has added quite a lot of value to the overall analysis, and I really think that this paper has good potential to publish in the research area. And I was also thinking that maybe in the context of India, obviously FDI is interesting, but I was just thinking that there can be some other aspect, like one is like, you know, and secondly, I was thinking that there can be some other factors like to the urbanization aspect or some investment, but
ma'am,
I think Bidisha ma'am has lost her connection.
yeah.
Just wait for a minute. We apologize for all the technical difficulties. I think this is one of the downsides of hosting on Zoom. But the plus side is that we're having students join us from all over the world, as well as Rizwanul sir.
in fact, my connection got disrupted. So just to conclude, I think you can also add some other interesting issues like effect of foreign remittance on the rural-urban migration. So FDIs is definitely important, but some other, or as you just said, like I would be more interested to look at the trade liberalization aspect. So that would be more interesting, and obviously in the if you can get some insights for the COVID, that will be a really exciting thing. So I think from my side, I would like to stop here. Thank you so much. So next presenter, we have Kishan Poudel from Nepal, and Kishan will be talking about macroeconomic indicators in the context of Nepal and Bangladesh. Kishan? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Shall I share my screen?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen?
Sure, we can.
Respected Dr. Islam and Dr. Bidisha, it's an honor to present in front of you guys. So I am Kishan Poudel with my teammates Bhavana Basnet and Sudarshan Gautam. We are basically comparing macroeconomic indicators of Nepal and Bangladesh, especially focusing upon the past condition and the present condition. The objective of this study is to analyze the strength and weakness to analyze the strength and weakness of the economy of Bangladesh and Nepal, and to analyze the trend of macroeconomic indicators. The methodology used in this research is especially based on secondary source of data. We extracted data from the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, Nepal Ministry of Finance, Bangladesh Ministry of Finance, Economic Survey of both nations, Central Bank of both nations, and other published articles. A checklist was developed and used as a guideline for collecting secondary data. Finally, MSEXL was used to compile, evaluate, analyze, and represent obtained data. So let us first look at the small relationship between Nepal and Bangladesh, since we are so close. Nepal and Bangladesh are one of the two countries in South Asia. Both are the members of SHARC, BIMSTEC, UN, and Nepal and Bangladesh established a diplomatic relation on 8th April 1972. So this is an overall glance about the characteristics of Nepal and Bangladesh, which we will be discussing further in the slides. So basically, we have analyzed 6 macroeconomic indicators, namely population, gross domestic product, trade, net FDI inflow, inflation, and remittance. These are usually the factors that we analyze while studying the macroeconomic indicators. So the first factor that we'll analyze is the population. You can see the population trend of Bangladesh and Nepal. You can see the population trend of Bangladesh and Nepal. Both are in the increasing trend. If you look at the data, the population of Bangladesh has increased by 2.51 times from 1971 to 2020. Population of Nepal has increased by 2.36 times in the same year. Now let us look at the population growth rate. It is an interesting since the population growth rate of both of the nations are decreasing trend. In case of Nepal, Nepal had a negative population growth rate from 2012 to 2014. Now, looking at the ratio of population of Bangladesh to Nepal, the population of Bangladesh far exceeds Nepal, since if you look at the past data, it has always been above higher than five times than that of Nepal. And looking at the population distribution, most of the population are distributed in the areas that you can see in the screen. Talking about the employment to population ratio, the employment ratio of Nepal is found in the range of 84% to 73%, while that of Bangladesh is found to be at the rate of 56% to 52%. And one of the most alarming factor is that for both countries, the employment to population ratio is decreasing. So we need to be aware about the situation and work accordingly. Now, talking about the gross domestic product, you can see the gross domestic product of Bangladesh and Nepal in the screen. The Bangladesh and Nepal GDP shown in the screen. You can look at the GDP growth rate. It shows that at past there was huge fluctuations in both Nepal and Bangladesh, and especially in Bangladesh, you can see sharp peaks and troughs respectively. But in relatively looking at the past decades and looking at present times, the fluctuation is quite normal. Now let us talk about the ratio of the GDP of Bangladesh to Nepal. The GDP of Bangladesh is far larger than that of Nepal. If you look in case of 2020 only, the GDP of Bangladesh was 9.6 times larger than that of the Nepal, and the historical GDP to GDP ratio can be seen in the screen. Now let us talk about the GDP per capita of Nepal and Bangladesh. You can see it in the screen. GDP per capita of Bangladesh to Nepal in 1971 was 1.86. However, this ratio has slightly decreased to 1.70 in 2020. Although the gap looks larger in the 2020, it's actually quite similar. Now let us look something at the trade. You can see the import percent of GDP in one side and export percentage of GDP. Import percentage of GDP does not look interesting because it's just in an upward trend, which shows that we are importing more as compared to past times. But if you look at the export percentage of GDP, we can find some interesting results. If you look at the year 2000, then from that time onwards, the export percentage of GDP of Nepal is declining rapidly. That means we are exporting less as compared to that we were exporting in the previous times.
You have 3 minutes left.
Now you can see the export products in 2020 of Bangladesh and Nepal in the screen, where the Bangladesh imported total merchandise, manufacturing items, and other items. In case of Nepal also, you can see the total merchandise, manufacturing items, and other items. And now let us look at the import comparison of 2019 and 2009. You can see that the fuels and mining products has increased of Bangladesh by 4 times. But if you look at the telecommunication equipments, it has increased by around 4.5 times of Nepal as compared to 2009. Now let us look at a few details about net FDI inflow. Net FDI inflow of Bangladesh is far larger than that of Nepal. There might be several reasons to it, but we are not going in details of that approach, because our major concern is just to look at the data and analyze it. Now let us look at a few information about inflation. This is the chart about the inflation. Inflation shows fluctuating trend for both Nepal and Bangladesh. Nepal recorded highest inflation of 17.14 in 1992, whereas Bangladesh reported highest inflation in 2011 at 11.39%. If you look at the recent data, in 2020, the inflation of Bangladesh was 5.69% and that of Nepal was 5.05%. Now, we should look at remittance because both of the countries are actually dependent upon remittance. You can see the chart of remittance of Bangladesh and Nepal in this diagram. So this diagram depicts some interesting facts, that is remittance received is an upward trend for both Nepal and Bangladesh, since we are both heavily dependent upon remittance. Remittance received by Nepal has increased by 162 times from 1993 to 2020. Whereas remittance received by Bangladesh has increased by only 21 times. This shows that Nepal is being excessively dependent upon remittance, and we should think about what can be done in near future to avoid some crisis if it happens in coming future. So now this is the difference between remittance received by Bangladesh and Nepal. So in this chart, we have just differentiated the remittance received by Bangladesh and Nepal.
You have 1 minute left.
Bangladesh received around 950 million more remittance than that of Nepal. Nonetheless, this number has increased to 13.65 billion in 2020. So to conclude, many similarities and differences are seen in between two nations. The population of Bangladesh was around 164 million in 2020, whereas that of population of Nepal was only 29 million in 2020. The GDP of Bangladesh is 9.6 times larger than that of Nepal, according to the present data. There used to be negative inflows of FDI for both countries, but in the recent years, both countries have had positive inflows. In comparatively, Bangladesh is found to have higher FDI. Similarly, Bangladesh used to receive remittance 15 times more than Nepal, but at present, the number has gone to around 2.68 times. And
Please
now,
wrap up in a minute.
And we also found that the inflation of Bangladesh is slightly higher than that in Nepal, but not considerably. Finally, the trade deficit of Bangladesh is 2.27 times higher than that of the Nepal. Thank you. I would appreciate any suggestion and questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kishan. I think it's very comprehensive. So I was thinking about one thing, that when obviously your title is telling that the macro indicators, but when we are talking about countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, it's very obvious that people will start thinking about some socioeconomic indicators as well, like the indicators of poverty, inequality, employment. So that would in fact make the story more complete. So I would be interested to look at those. Secondly, we should keep in mind that when we are comparing these two, to any of the two countries or any countries, more than one countries, then there can be differences in the definition, in the categorization. So when you will do the analysis, just make sure that you collect the data from one source rather than multiple sources. So if it's the data from, for example, you can use the data of World Bank or Human Development Index, so which has data of the countries and which is calculated in the similar fashion. Otherwise, there can be the results can be a bit distorted. And the third point, I was just thinking that in some aspects you have shown the similarities, some aspects you have shown the differences. So maybe a bit analytical explanation why you have seen the similarities and why you have seen the differences. That would give it a bit of story, because at the end of any economics research, it is always interesting to have a story out of the analysis. So that is something I would like to add. And obviously, some econometric analysis based on, maybe you can talk about the GDP or explain some of the GDP, which is a more comprehensive explanation, or Human Development Index, and you may try to see how different factors have affected these countries, and then you can compare. So that type of econometric analysis would make the story more complete. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I think now we are going to the last presentation, if I'm not wrong. So for the last presentation, we have with us Mr. Ragib Anjum from Bangladesh, University of Dhaka. And Ragib will be talking about a primary survey that I think they have conducted regarding health-seeking behavior among the university students in Bangladesh. So Ragib, over to you.
Thanks to the Honorable Chair for giving me the floor today. Greetings to the Honorable Special Guest of the occasion, and also thanks to the esteemed member of the organizing committee for organizing this awesome event. I believe my screen is visible, and I would be starting my presentation. Our title was mainly how the religious belief is shaping the health-seeking behavior of the students. The survey was done in the context of Dhaka University, as we are studying here, and we believe Dhaka University is quite a good amount of uh, students, having a quite good amount of student, and the sample size is really the representation of the whole Bangladesh, because people from many demographics are coming here. So I believe that was the main incentive for taking Dhaka University as the sample size. Uh, First of all, let's come to the health-seeking behavior part. We have tried to define the health-seeking behavior. Health-seeking behavior mainly means the action which are taken for individuals' health-related remedies. It can be taken as a primitive measure prior to the any sort of health-related problem. It can be taken during the sickness, like the medications or like any sort of drugs, and it can be also taken after the time, or like when he is cured, like for the recovery purposes. And it can also happen like during the emergency periods, like we have seen during the COVID pandemic, that the shots was taken like the vaccination. So they are mainly the health seeking behavior. So it can be like washing the hand, or it can also be complicated like taking different sort of drugs, or going under certain sort of medicating like measurements. So that was what we meant by health seeking behavior. And we have just tried to understand that how that is related to the religious belief. Religious belief has really shaped the history and the culture of the world, and that's why we believe that to define some sort of relationship between health seeking behavior and religious belief in the context of Bangladesh was really important from our perspective, because our country, we believe that there are many socio-economic dynamic played among the religion and the society, but most of the time this sort of socio-economic dynamic is not put into the perspective, not brought forward. So we believe that it was really important, and as a result we have gone through many literature reviews, and we have seen that if we look at the case of Indonesia, in Indonesia, the Mohammedan community has really used the methods of like ijtihad to fight against the situation of COVID pandemic. They have used this method of ijtihad, like you can say, like religious interpretation, and that has been used as a community to take community measures, just
That's fine. You said.
spread awareness, or like
I said.
creating some, I believe somebody, okay, creating like good taking good initiatives, or like working for the community. And also same sort of thing has been seen on like the American communities. Like many of the faith communities in America have just stopped like many sort of their relationships or with the church or with the mosque, because they needed to be locked into their houses. So it was really seen in the foreign context. So there was not any sort of study done in the context of Bangladesh, and we have just tried to highlight the situation of Bangladesh, and that was our main concern. So we tried that on the context of Dhaka University, and we have main objective of this research was to identify if there was any correlation between the health-seeking behavior and religious belief, or like the religious sermons or the teachings. Secondly, we have tried to identify if there was any sort of economic or religious or demographical dynamics working between them. And we have also tried to focus how that is affecting the COVID, how the students are getting their behavioral changes during the COVID-19 times. And we have also tried to suggest some policy making decisions that can be taken. Our methodology was mainly epistemic research. Like we have tried to go to a mixed method. We have collected the data using the survey, and we have also arranged some focus group discussion with religious leaders. We have
You have
collected
3
the data.
minutes left.
Okay. We have collected that data using the SPSS, using the Google form, and analyzed that in the SPSS. We have tried to balance it among like the gender, the faculty, the students are coming from the religious affiliation, their income range, and their residential areas, and that was quite balanced. relating them. We have mainly came out with major 4 findings. Like if you look at that, identifying the students as religiousness, like most of the women of Dhaka University, the lady students who are studying in Dhaka University, they have identified themselves as more religious, and they have like said that they are more religious and they have identified themselves as that. But comparing that to the male students, that is much more not like that. They have identified themselves less religious. But when we come to the mental health condition, we have also asked, like, are their mental health been affected by the religious sermons, or are the religious sermons, when they are saying that during the pandemic you would have to be mentally firm, you don't need to be don't need to go into any sort of breakdown. We have seen that the male students are getting much more calmness, or like much more peace from hearing these sort of religious sermons. But the female student, despite of believing themselves more religious, or despite of marking themselves as more religious, they have not gone any sort of like a religious remedy from these sermons, or like religious teaching. So this was, I believe, a important finding. Among the students of Dhaka University, they are really high class, like they get many sort of advantages, but there was a huge chance of misinformation present there. Like almost 9%, like 10 out of 1 people was believing that COVID-19 would only affect the people who are outside your faith. That is really concerning. Another thing was like
You have
4
1
out of
minute
1
left.
person was okay, 4 out of 1 person was believing like the people praying together, there won't be any chance of like spreading the COVID virus. And also another concerning finding was like among 10 out of like 3 people was believing that during the disaster and calamity you would have to continue the congregational prayer, like which was stopped by the government authorities. So we believe this sort of misinformation was not like being remedied by the religious bodies, which was really done in the foreign context, but it was not present in the context of Bangladesh. The vaccinophobia was really high, but there was a correlation being drawn by many authorities that there is a correlation between the religious awareness and the vaccinophobia. But we have found that main of reasons behind this vaccinophobia was like they was scared of needles, they were not having the proper information about the vaccine, and they was not confidence toward the vaccine. We have also found like that many people was going to the medical institutions for like seeking mental health benefits, and there was also the
Please wrap
hygienic
up within a minute.
practices was mainly encouraged by the medical authorities rather than from religious teachings, which was present in the foreign context. So concluding up, main finding was that the religious approach is not solving the issue of building awareness. So we believe there is a huge chance of working on this factor. And also, like in certain cases, this sort of awareness was really working well in foreign context, but not found in our context. And like religious community of Bangladesh is quite strong, but it was a huge chance for us to use this to remedify this problem, but it was not used as much as it was possible to use. So we believe there is a huge chance of working on it. So that was all for ourselves. Thanks to the honorable chair and all the people who are present. Thanks for hearing us.
Thank you, Ragib. Very interesting results that you have got. So few comments. I was thinking that when you ask this type of question, which are often sensitive and which can get the biases, so that is something you must keep in mind, that when you are talking about these issues, when you are asking some self-reported views from an individual, that can often that can have some misleading information. So that is one thing that you should keep in mind. Secondly, when we are talking about the students of Dhaka University, they are not representative of the Bangladesh, because they are more educated, so they should have a little bit of different analytical ability or analytical sense. But interestingly, in your analysis, we have not found reflection of that. And that, if if the analysis is done correctly, that is something that is a bit not very positive thing to hear. So that is something that maybe you need to check and see that why this type of factors that you have got. Thirdly, so there's a selected sample. So this is a selected sample. So this is the typical issue of the sample selection issue. So if you can compare it with the overall population, then that can be different. At different age group, things can be very different as well. And I was just thinking that I just missed the initial part. So whether you have asked the people how you were able to construct the variables related to the religious belief. So I would suggest that you can maybe use things like Likert scale, which is a ranking scale. So belief, strong belief, medium belief, don't believe at all. And so if you can have that, so that might be often give some interesting idea when you have this type of issues, when you are dealing with this type of issues. So that is one thing that I would like to add. And also another thing is like the answers that we are getting from your analysis. So that is something that the male female gender differences. I would be interested to see if there is any rural urban differences or any differences with the dorm students who are staying in the university hall and who are not staying in the university hall. Maybe that can have some differences as well. So these are some of the ways that you can add some value to your work. And obviously there is scope to do some econometric analysis as well, given that you have some of the data. So that is all I have from my side. So if I'm not wrong, that we have by this time we have been able to cover or we have been able to listen all 5 presentations. So now probably the most awaited part, we would like to hear from Dr. Rizwanul Islam. So Dr. Rizwanul Islam, sir, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Sayema. And let me also thank Dhaka University Economics Study Center for extending this invitation to me to attend this very important seminar and very interesting session in that seminar. If I remember correctly, the overall theme that was mentioned to me was economics of change, development in a dynamic world. I thought that was a very interesting theme that has been thought of. So I got very interested, of course, not just because of the theme, but also because of a couple of other reasons. First, of course, an opportunity to interact with students, which I always welcome. And second, here I find in this session, I would have an opportunity to interact with students, not only from Bangladesh, other South Asian countries. As you might have heard, that in my after my teaching at Dhaka University, I had a career in an international organization, and I really enjoyed my work in a broader context. So here I have this opportunity. So thank you all very much, the organizers. Now, what am I supposed to do? I have been hearing Dr. Sayema, for example, mentioned that I will be commenting on the papers. In fact, initially when I received a communication from the Economics Study Center, that's what was mentioned to me. And I got a cold feet, I would say, that 5 papers on 5 different topics, do I have the competence at all to even attempt that? So I kind of, if I may use the term, negotiated that I will, if agreed, not comment on the papers so much. And fortunately now I find that Dr. Sayema has already provided very specific, detailed comments I'm not sure what grade I would have got if I were a student now, and particularly a student of Dr. Sayema. Anyway, I'm glad I'm not required to be a student again. So what I will instead do is the time I have, I will use that to make a few general observations, keeping in mind the overall theme that I mentioned that I got for the conference. And in that context, I will weave in a few aspects from selected papers, not all. But I must also make a couple of other observations. One is, on a personal note, I was reading Amartya Sen's memoir, Home in the World. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. It's an extremely interesting and I would say fascinating piece of work. And there are many things, 400 some pages. But one thing that I found, what makes a scholar and what makes a great scholar? How do you learn and acquire knowledge? There are different ways. And one which he has mentioned, one only, there are others. One he has mentioned is in Bengali language, we call it adda. In English, I don't know whether there is at all a proper translation for that, but I would say informal discussion. In the course of informal discussions, one can learn a lot. And now here on this platform, we have gone beyond those informal discussions which we normally have outside the classrooms to a very formalized, structured discussion. And I think these are very important ways of acquiring knowledge. And I'm not sure, I don't remember during my student days, we had this kind of an opportunity. You are much more advanced. I'm talking about the students. I don't think, even though I studied econometrics at some point in my student life, I don't think I applied when I was a student. So that's number one. And number two, related to that, the papers, not only that, they cover such a wide range of issues and topics, they all are of a level which is very enviable, I would say. Of course, Dr. Sayema, like a good teacher, she has made very searching and often constructive observations. Leaving that aside, I think all the papers are of a very high standard, and they have the potential, the ingredients of becoming a much bigger work, if you like. I don't know how many of you would really go for higher studies or want to go for higher studies. Nowadays, not many take interest in PhDs and so on and so forth. But if you go, I think these papers can provide you with some foundation for that kind of work. So I think I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot from what you have presented. And that I consider to be a very important externality of this kind of discussion, if you like. Okay, now I come to the actual issues that I wanted to highlight or present to you. By the way, if I remember, I was told I could take about 20 minutes. Is that correct? Of which I have already used 5-6 minutes. So is
sure,
that
it's fine. I think we have some time.
okay.
Yeah.
So, but please, Sayema, tell me at least 3-4 minutes before you want me to stop. Actually, please alert me.
I think there is a very strict timekeeper. So
yeah.
I'm
Okay.
sure
Whoever, please, please feel free to do that. First, I will make just 1 or 2 general observations on development in general. because you did mention development in a dynamic world, and here we have been talking about development issues. What do we mean by that? And quite often we talk about growth and per capita income, growth in per capita income, growth in GDP, and so on and so forth. Although during the last 50 years, I thought we had gone a long way from what I call growth fetishism. And in fact, it started in the 70s when there was a book by a few officials of the World Bank itself, Growth with Redistribution. I think it was in 1974 or 75. And since then, there has been a good deal of work. We don't need to be original in that. Amartya Sen's famous book, Development as Freedom. And then came, I think in 2010, a little work which was initiated by the French president at that time. He requested three famous economists, Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, Amartya Sen, and a French economist, I think his name is Fitoussi. Three of them came up with a little book called Mismeasuring Our Lives. GDP, mismeasuring our lives, not measuring. So that was the basic theme. So I thought we had gone a long way, and yet we still keep talking about growth, GDP, and so on and so forth. So I would like to start by saying this, that what does development mean? And taking all of these into consideration, it's not something original that I'm saying. I would say development is a process which should lead to an improved life for us, or all of us, not just a few who are sitting here. Improved or decent life and living. I would characterize development as that it should move towards whatever change we talk about. It should lead towards a decent life and living. And I have said elsewhere also that there should be 5 different elements. Of course, first is decent living. We need to eat well, we need to wear good clothes and so on, have a good shelter and so on. That's one. And in order to do that, we need to have work, good work, and I use the word following my longtime employer, decent work, and which would give me a decent income, not just any work for survival. So that's the first element. And then the second element in formal language called social protection, because I have reached an age where I can't work anymore, but I need something to survive on. So there should be some income. I don't need to depend on, so that I don't need to depend on my children or and so on and so on. So a society should have an arrangement, and that is what is called social protection, and for all, not just for a few. The third element, I would say, again, following Amartya Sen, my capabilities, and everyone's, men, women of all classes, capabilities can be enhanced through a variety of means by good education, good training, good health, and so on and so forth. That's the third element or the pillar that I would include in this process. And the fourth is discrimination. There are all kinds of discrimination between men and women, between classes, between race, and so on and so forth. We need to move away from that. We need to have a society which is free of discrimination. And finally, a bit of freedom for me. I want to speak out. I want to be able to say whether I want to take the vaccine or not. I don't want to be told by someone that you must take vaccine. Yes, someone can advise me that vaccine is a very good thing And if you do this, these will be the benefits. If you don't do this, these will not be, these are the problems. And you can, of course, penalize me. You can make my life difficult for not taking the vaccine, that you will not be able to enter your favorite coffee shop if you are not vaccinated. But you can't say that tomorrow someone will come. And so I need to have a little bit of freedom of expression, to be able to choose whether it is Dr. Sayema or whether Namira or whoever would speak on my behalf. So these are the 5 elements that I would like to see improving in the process of development and move towards, take me to a decent living and life. Okay, that's. Now I come to the word change. Change, of course, in any developing society or anywhere is a continuous process. But we need to be a little more specific as to what change do we want to see and what kind of change, where and what kind. And here I would like to distinguish 2 aspects. One is aggregate, overall, like if we talk about income, here we have heard about GDP per capita, GNP or GNI or whatever. Income, we have heard about consumption, we can, but at the aggregate level. But we'd like to look at the composition of these as well. Likewise, we can talk about employment, but whose employment? We can talk about prices. I read in newspapers everywhere, Bangladesh, US, everywhere, prices are increasing. Which prices are increasing? Are these food prices, rice prices, or very fine basmati rice, or the coarse rice that is consumed by the general people? So we need to look at inflation in a disaggregated manner. Although a standard IMF official might say that don't even bother to look into these finer aspects of inflation. Look at inflation and hit it. But before that, we need to look at what prices. We talk about technology. We hear a lot about nowadays, particularly, but technology has always been important. That 4th industrial revolution and technology, we can't fall behind, but technology for whom? What kind? And so on and so forth. So we need to look at both aggregate and composition of change. That's the first element. And then comparison. We have been hearing a good deal about this in the presentations, comparing Nepal and in Bangladesh, comparing BSDED, and so on. A few questions. I think before we start that, the purpose. Why do we want to compare? Like here we compared Nepal and Bangladesh, or we compared rural and urban. Why do we compare? Now, countries, if we keep it at that level, let's say Nepal, Bangladesh, or China, India, why do we compare that? Now, again, if you go to the literature on growth and development, you will see that there has been a good deal written. And it started basically with the word convergence. Basically in the 50s and 60s, when we started talking about growth, particularly development or growth in developing countries, one focus was that how soon they can catch up with developed countries, meaning converging towards a particular level. So that's one of the major purposes of comparing aggregates, growth rates, GDP per capita, GNP per capita, and things like that. And you can find a big literature, even standard textbooks like Devraj Rai's development economics, or specialized books like, I was the other day looking at a book by Michael Spence. Michael Spence is one of the Nobel laureates. In 2012, he wrote a book called The Next Convergence. So we need to keep in mind why we are doing doing these comparisons. Sometimes, or not sometimes, in fact, very frequent comparisons are between China and India. Why? Because these are both are big countries. They started at similar levels. China started as a socialist closed economy. India, not socialist, but somewhat closed. So there was a lot of interest. Brazil and India, again, big countries, started with very similar strategies of import substitution, industrialization, and so on and so forth. Recently, Bangladesh, Vietnam, this has become again, because both started at a particular level, and there is a kind of competition in growth, which is growing higher and so on. So we have to keep in mind the context of the comparison, why we are comparing. And then comes the yardsticks. We have found, and Dr. Sayema has already mentioned, cautioned, we have to be a little careful. Like GDP per capita, should we use that as a yardstick? Because GDP actually does not include quite a few elements. If you go back to the basic national income accounting, this is not the place for me to go into that. You will see what the difference is between GDP and GNP, GNI, and all that. And you can easily see which one should be a more appropriate indicator or yardstick. Likewise, should we do the market price values or any other? Bread, or let's say $1 US does not buy the same amount of rice in Bangladesh, Nepal, and India and Sri Lanka. So that's why this concept of purchasing power parity, I'm sure you have read it, so one can use those and so on. Even simple or apparently simple concepts like employment or unemployment. Compare unemployment. In Bangladesh, unemployment has not been above 4.5%. And Amartya Sen, in his 1973 book, I think it came out in 1973 or 1974, Employment, Technology and Development. If you are interested, you can look at that. He used the India figure and said it can put developing countries to shame. So Bangladesh figure can put developing countries to shame that we have such low unemployment. Should we use that to compare? Likewise, inflation rates. Is 5.5% of Bangladesh the same thing as 7% in US now, and so on and so forth? So we need to be a little careful in using our yardsticks, and certainly go beyond the aggregates also. Now, up to now, I have been talking about only aggregates, but composition, extremely important. Not just, actually, Dr. Sayema already mentioned in the context of Nepal, Bangladesh, whether you compare or not, we have to go beyond aggregate income, beyond growth, look at the distribution, look at the impact on different groups of people, and then there you will find complexities, not easy. Income distribution, Gini coefficient, if you keep it at that level, it's fine. You can compare Bangladesh, maybe 0.49 or even whatever it is now, Nepal, so and so and so. But if you look at the actual Lorenz curve, which lies behind these Gini coefficients, you can see that it is very difficult, even within the same countries. Again, I think Amartya Sen, my book was here the other day, I was saying, looking at this on economic inequality. That also came out in the 70s at some point. I think that was the first time he showed the Lorenz curves may intersect for the same country, let's say 2010 Bangladesh and 2016 Bangladesh. The Gini coefficients, easy to compare, whether it has increased or not. But if you look at the Lorenz curves, they may intersect. Now the question would be, is inequality at the lower end and less inequality at the upper end a better thing? Or less inequality at the lower end and more inequality at the upper end would be a better thing? Who judges this? So there are these very difficult questions and issues of comparison. And I think before I conclude, I would like to just touch upon two other papers. Permanent income hypothesis. I must admit, I have not seen any empirical work. I think the author himself also mentioned that there has not been any work on this in Bangladesh. It's a very interesting piece of work, but I would think that it could have been even more interesting if we went to the class differences. What happens to the lowest 40% of the income distribution compared to the, let's say, the highest 10% or highest 10%, 20%? Does this transitory income appear significant for all classes or only for aggregate? And so that would open up a whole lot of interesting questions. And that's why I said at the beginning, each of these papers would have great potential for further work, for development, and so on. The second paper that I wanted to make a very specific mention, religious and health-seeking behavior. I'm very happy to see that someone thought of doing this work, but I think, as Dr. Sayema already mentioned, it needs to take a broader approach. Dhaka University students, okay, and the point that I wanted to mention, that the importance of religion can be seen not only in Bangladesh, even in a highly developed country like US or countries of Western Europe. You can see people citing religion as an argument for not taking vaccine against COVID-19. So again, that might open kind of Pandora's box, but someone took courage and decided to investigate that. And I think it has great potential. I think I will stop here, but before I really stop, I would like to simply reiterate a couple of points. The first, of course, I say this very often, that go beyond the indicators and see whether they indicate real development, in the sense, not that you have to agree with what I have said, but see whether it makes sense that development should lead to a decent life and living, and whether these changes are leading towards that. And if you, whatever you do, go into the beyond the surface, ask questions, go into the situation beyond the surface, use models. No, actually, models are very useful, but ask questions about, we don't need to be, what should I say, diffident. We don't need to feel diffident that such and such person has developed this model, and I must test this. But then there are questions. Why? So go beyond. We should try to go beyond those models and see what was lacking in that and what I can bring in, to quote Dr. Sayema, to add value to my analysis, and that way we can take things forward along. Thank you. I think I should stop here. I have taken more time than I thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now I'm just wondering whether there are questions to the from the audience. Shall I take few questions? Shall we take few questions?
Yes, ma'am. There have been several questions. I will,
in the Facebook? Okay.
Yes, ma'am, in the Facebook. So we would like to read them out loud for sir. The first question is that experts are saying that COVID-19 may lead to growth divergence. Do you think this kind of aggregate comparisons are not of high priority right now?
Do you want me to go by each question, or you want to collect a few? I'm open to either of these.
So whatever suits.
Okay, so let me then take this and see if meanwhile there are other observations on this. Actually, nothing should stop. I often say about this COVID-19 thing, that we need to be prepared to live with that, live with COVID-19, rather than thinking that it's over. Many of my, or at least some, if not many, some of my friends and acquaintances in Bangladesh were saying, I think towards the end of last year, that there's no COVID here. And then started this, I think towards the end of December or January, right? Going up and so on and so forth. And at the place where I'm sitting now, it's a little country called Switzerland, and they are going through what they call the 5th wave of COVID-19, 5th, number 5. So it goes down and goes up and goes down. So and nobody knows. I'm not talking about generalists like us. I'm talking about scientists, health experts, and so on and so forth. Nobody can predict that there will not be another mutation, so to say, on another variant. So life can't stop here. We have to look at both those, the overall, the aggregate growth, but also give priority to other issues, and not just the immediate issues. The immediate issue which emerged from the experience of the pandemic was health, and not just Bangladesh. I'm now talking about the world as a whole, the humankind as a whole. Even in a country like US, in a city like New York, temporary camps or extensions of hospitals had to be set up in Central Park. Those of you who know New York, you know Central Park is a huge park spreading across kilometers. So the first wave, during the first wave, the onrush was such that they were not sure they could cope in the conventional hospitals. In this country where I'm sitting, at some point, the so-called funeral homes were not able to cope anymore. So funeral was, the last rites, they were arranged in some parks in addition to the conventional. So the observation that I wanted to make is that limitations of humankind as a whole came up during this time. So we need to devote a lot more attention to health, and certainly in developing countries like ours, and not just in the private sector, healthcare to be provided by the society. That is that should be high priority in any country, but that doesn't mean that we forget other things. So that's how I put it.
Sir, we had one more question for you. Sir, according to you, what makes a good economist? And what is the key to being an expert in development economics in particular?
I would suggest not that it will answer your question. And I have not received any mandate to promote this book, but Amartya Sen's memoir, Home in the World, I think a cheaper edition in India has been published, and it is now available in Bangladesh. And you can ask the economics department administration to provide a couple of copies in the seminar library. Does that exist?
Yes,
I'm talking about Dhaka University.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I'm not talking about other universities. Dhaka University economics department itself had a separate collection. So that collection is still there.
Yes, sir.
It may be administratively quicker. That's why I'm saying. Rather than writing to the central library, if this book should be procured, it can come after 6 months. So, but if you can arrange a few copies in the seminar, I would strongly recommend reading this, not just from the narrow point of view of becoming a good development economist or a good economist. What makes a good, what should I say, scholar, searching, analyst, and so on and so forth. Sorry, this perhaps doesn't provide you with the answer, but the question is such that it will take a bit longish discourse.
Maybe it's more important to be a good human being than a good economist.
Of course, that is, but
Yes.
that doesn't say that
A good economist cannot be a good human being.
We should not consider these to be mutually exclusive. That's the first thing that we should keep in mind. But whatever our own individual field is, we need to find ways of excelling in that field. And there is no shortcut to what I would call effort. Effort, hard work, however brilliant you are, in order to be good in any field, whether it is economics or biology, hard work and going beyond, and that's what you are doing. Actually, I don't think you will get any grades for writing these papers and attending such seminars. So these are things that you need to do. This is an example of what you need to do. And of course, study, read, and talk, discuss amongst people. If you ask me, I'm not claiming that I of course, left my profession and you know that, left teaching and did something else. So I can't really provide you with good advice. But whenever I get a chance, I try to read. And reading is extremely important. There is no shortcut, no substitute.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for your guideline. It will help us a lot. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Bidisha ma'am to give her concluding remarks.
Thank you. I was just thinking that maybe there has been so much of discussion. Generally, a chair of session summarizes the discussion, but it was so diverse that it's not possible to summarize. Basically, today we have talked about probably 4 countries: India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And we have talked from rural-urban migration to macroeconomy to education. So basically, we have also focused on primary data. We have focused on theoretical models. We have seen works on microeconomics. We have seen work on macroeconomics. So it was the whole session, I think it was very comprehensive. So congratulations to ESC. You did a very good job, and it was a tremendous job. Now, the fact is, like, why we are writing paper. When I am writing paper, maybe there is a different reason, or when you are writing paper for course 405 or 301, that is a different reason. But generally, our main purpose is to do an analysis, to do a research work, is to publish a paper, to have some academic contribution, and to have some policy insights as well. So basically, a good paper should have the component of academic, that should be of academic value, and that should try to have some research, interesting research question, use the appropriate methodology, and at the end of the paper, the paper should be able to answer the question and suggest some interesting insight for the policymakers. And from that point of view, and that when we are talking about that, makes the contribution to the academia and to the policymakers as well. So a good economist should try to do both of the things together. And the journey of publishing a paper and to have some proper solid policy insight is very painful. So you will see the rejection, you will have to redo many of the things, and it's like months and months you have to wait, and then you may find rejection. So despite of the fact, I think all of the papers that we have seen today, it was of extremely high quality, and all of them have done a tremendous job. And I would suggest that you, rather than stopping here, you should try to make it a publishable standard, and that will help you to understand your research question better, and that will help you to contribute to the academic literature, and also some policy implication as well. There are some interesting policy implication as well. But at the end of the day, I would also like to say that there was a lecture by Professor Wahiduddin Mahmood few days back, and I think all of you have listened, and I was just thinking, and I would like to say that at the end of the day, economics cannot solve all of the problems. So we have to think about it as a comprehensive way. Economics is one of the tools, and which is a very strong tool. We are proud of it, but at the end of the day, there are social aspects, there are cultural aspects, there are anthropological aspects. As a social scientist, we have to think everything in a comprehensive manner. And at the end of the day, being an econometrics teacher, I must say that techniques are important. Indeed, it is important to try to answer a research question, but at the end of the day, we should try to tell a story and a clear message through a story is most important, and that is actually the most difficult part of doing an analysis as well. So I would like to congratulate ESC, and I would like to thank all of the student participants, and of course Dr. Rizwanul Islam sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
From the ESC, we would now like to thank our presenters for their informative presentations, our special guest, Dr. Rizwanul Islam, for his insightful comments, and Bidisha ma'am for moderating the session. Last but not least, we would like to thank you, our audience, on Zoom and Facebook for tuning in today.
Okay, thank you.
Tune in next time for our third panel discussion titled Reimagining Rural-Urban Spaces and Sustainable Cities at 7:30 p.m. BST tomorrow. For this session, we will have Dr. Muhammad Saidul Rahman, Dr. Nawshad Ahmed, Dr. Farah Kabir, and Professor Adnan Zilul Morshid with Dr. Firdausi Nahar as the session chair. See you all then.
Okay.